The NWO, the New World Order, as they like to call themselves, took advantage of 9/11. They did not do 9/11, nor did any of the other major feudalistic crime families, apart from the Saudis and Binladens and the Pakistani ISI, where the idea may have originated from to attack the Twin Towers, and then that went to the Haqqani network, and then Osama bin Laden became involved later on. What we what we must do though is to also understand why the both Saudis, the Bin Ladens, and the NWO all fear the US and EU governments, because the US and EU governments have been based on the university system, which spread from England to Germany after the Second World War, which got rid of National Socialism in Germany and got rid of ultra-conservatism and Freemasonry in Britain, for the most part. There are little outposts here and there, which I'm not going to talk to you about because I don't want you to go there and find out for yourselves the hard way. Now, the reason why Alex Jones has been able to radicalise people is because there has been no investigation in 9/11. Now, I'm for an investigation into 9/11, but I'm not in favour of an investigation which decapitates the American government. And many people on my channel have made hints that they believe that there was something wrong on 9/11 with the way the buildings fell or other such things. Now, the key factor to understand is that the Saudis and Bin Ladens wanted you to think it was a false flag, so you would be radicalised by such people as Jones, because they obviously would have known of his existence, because this man has been doing this since the early 1990s, right? This vermin, Alex Jones, has been doing this since the 1990s, and he's been trying to radicalise people to believe in these things, to expose them to danger, because of course the New World Order is only a very small organisation. It's hardly an organisation. Most of the people who are involved are insane, but they are purely evil, right? As Andrei Breivik shows, because I have to deal with this issue, because they're not just using knives and boxing and poison and women to infiltrate different organisations and crush them or try and take them over, like they've done with the National Front, with the BNP, with the UKIP, with the EDL, how they got Margaret Thatcher into power. You know, so they are a potent force, but they're not as potent as the Bin Ladens or Saudis. The Thatcher had to invite the Bin Ladens into the UK because the Bin Ladens wanted to go to the UK. You know, that doesn't get Margaret Thatcher off the hook. She did invite them, you know, but everybody thought that they were Dutch, Leyden Corporation. You could see their cranes all over London, as I've said in many videos. Now, that was how involved and how connected all the different feudalistic crime families were. The Thatcher crime family was is part of the NWO, and they were responsible primarily for getting the ANC in so that the NWO could have access to the resources and mining contracts in South Africa. They sent weapons, they sent arms, and this resulted in a genocide of the Boers, which has killed millions of people and forced millions of black South Africans as well into even greater poverty and having to survive crime rates which equal the death rate of Iraq at the height of the insurgency. Now, why did Exxon and Halliburton lobby for the Iraq War, the second Iraq War, and why do they want to attach the 9/11 conspiracy issue to everyone who was against the Iraq War or who still is against the Iraq War, since in some ways it's still continuing, albeit that Al Qaeda and the Americans both lost in Iraq. The Americans have 10,000 troops in Iraq, but they do not control the country. The Iranians came out top in that show of force, briefly, but now the Saudis are trying to reassert themselves by hijacking the Arab Spring, which is an even greater danger. The Arab Spring could be both a tragedy and a hope to the Arab people. The hope is that they will spread democracy throughout Arabia and be more assertive in their control of their own oil rather than it being controlled by the Saudis. And this is something that the New World Order fears, because if they can't go into a direct confrontation with the Saudis, they will lose. They can't go into direct confrontation with the Binladens, who are their enemies, they will lose. They can't go into a direct confrontation with the American or EU governments, they will lose. So they have to use other things, and they used the American invasion, the US government's assets, to get their way in Iraq. But they had similar community of interest with Al Qaeda. And people who believe that Al Qaeda was simply a fabrication of the CIA, there was a database. Well, there was a database of people who were in Al Qaeda during the Afghan-Soviet war. But to say that they're not a real organisation, as Michael Schurer himself said, who is a great critic of the American foreign policy in the Middle East and Central Asia, and everything to do with how we've dealt with Al Qaeda, is simply a fabrication, and that fabrication leads back again to Alex Jones. The man is a fraud. You know, he's trying to get you to believe a fraud. Why? Because he wants to decapitate the American government so that they can have their way with you, and he'd like to do the same thing to the EU. And I, for one, on my watch, will not let him do that. Right? If I have any power in my through YouTube to do that, I will wake people up to that fact. Now, as I was saying with Iraq, Al Qaeda tried a direct military intervention in Iraq, much the same way as the Americans tried a direct military intervention. And in fact, one of the reasons why during the Gulf War, which is when Al Qaeda as a force became anti-American, because they see themselves as the defensive fighters, as opposed to the Saudis, who are imperialists who want to take over the world. The Al Qaeda see themselves as defensive, and when the Saudis went to the Americans for protection, that sparked off the whole chain of events that would lead to 9/11, because the Bin Ladens, and Osama bin Laden in particular, had said that he would like to be the one to remove Saddam Hussein. Now, indirectly through his actions, he did achieve that, and so there was clearly a problem for the American government to explain why they fell into so many political traps. Also, the reason for the American government to explain was a distinct possibility that George Bush could have been assassinated on 9/11. Would the American government want you, the American people, to know that? Is that one of the reasons why they've not done an investigation? Other than a 9/11 commission, where everyone who was on that commission had an interest in stopping the truth getting out about the failings of 9/11. Also, the biggest factor of 9/11, I believe, was the forcing through corridor of fear tactics Al Qaeda to get into those buildings. A corridor of fear tactics are where you threaten people's families or threaten to kill people's families to get to an objective, and that is what the NWO have done in past operations against other people, although they did not do 9/11, as I've said before. Al Qaeda and the Bin Ladens did 9/11. Now, the other thing is Northern Vigilance, Operation Northern Vigilance, when the Americans were doing an operation, an exercise to prevent Soviet incursion into US airspace.